That's the guys who do my course will see that graph again. But if you don't do my course, it may come as a bit of a shock to realize that the world globalized big time and it all went away like big time. And that's why looking at history is like quite interesting in that respect. That's another one. I don't want to spend too long. That's a map of how easy it was or hard it was to move money around. There's nothing linear about globalization. Globalization can go away. So how does globalization happen? Two things I think are going on: technology and policy. So our global world, we had the web and everything associated with it. And that was a huge force for globalization. This first wave of globalization, it gets easier to move things around the earth, transport, everything else, easier to communicate until the telegraph system is created. Information moves around the world as fast as you could walk, run, sail, or go in a boat, and that's it. By the time telegraph's invented, information can get from Europe to Asia in 30 minutes. It's a huge transformation. Technology was very important, but policy was very important. Basically, first globalization happened because policymakers flattened the earth. A lot of flattening was by imperialism. Chinese don't want to trade with the West. They get knocked down and trade with the West. Because you can invest anywhere. You can move goods anywhere. If you're an indigenous person, you're swept away for white people to take your land. That's the story of the United States. Policy created a global world, or a particular type of global world. Then, as now, the capitalist system developed very large firms. Just as now we have the Microsofts or Apples of the world, then we had the US Steels and Standard Oil companies of the world, or the Singer sewing machines of the world. That's Singer sewing machine's biggest market. Its biggest market was in Russia. It's a highly globalized company, just as like Apple or whatever is now. So how did it end? How did that world go away? Well, there's a story of wars and the Great Depression, but that's not why it ended. It ended because people put in different sets of policies. They wanted globalization to go away. And they erected barriers, immigration controls, capital controls, trade controls, expropriated globalization. It took it all away. Why did they take it all away? And my own view is they took it away because it had lost legitimacy. Too many people had lost from globalization, and it went away. There were quite some interesting red flags that it was going to go away. Let me talk about a few of them. First red flag was actually an environmental crisis. I was afraid I was talking to my class today about that. The thing about globalization is it encourages fast economic growth. The problem about fast economic growth is it eats resources. It happened then. There's massive damage in the 19th century. Smoke pollution, ecological damage, and there's a reaction to it. These people are starting to, first NGOs, everything else, are starting to get very concerned that globalization damages you. Globalization lets newcomers, new powers, rise, and those new powers then want to set their own rules. So in the first globalization, you have Germany challenging, the new state of Germany challenging Britain, and it ends very badly. And that's sort of the German warships parading around. That, of course, is the South China Sea. Some people do a lot better in globalization than others. In this period, Islam does extremely badly, or is perceived by many people to do very badly. The great Islamic powers in the world are disseminated. are destroyed. What you get is a reaction to that. Wahhabism develops in the 18th century. It's suppressed, but in the late 19th century, militant Islam all over the whole area starts to really violently object to the perceived inequality and injustice in the world. The same philosophy we have with the ISIS people, particular type of Puritan. And the thing about this is that they legitimize killing other Muslims. It's a very violent and puritanical form of Islam. Any more red signals that a thing is going on? Well, the thing is, firms used to be very small, but as they got very big and very global, they were separated from the people they worked with, and they kind of lost interest in their own communities. And by the late 19th century, you have the growth of labor unions, you have the growth of Marxism, socialism, and eventually most of the world kicks out capitalism altogether. Funny thing is that as it got easier to move around the world, people really started disliking other people on a massive scale. The 19th century sees huge flows of immigration. Cities like New York become highly cosmopolitan, mixed ethnicities, all of that sort of stuff. And across system-wide, people start to really dislike that. And you can see it across geographies. In China, the Boxer Rebellion, really violent attack on Christians, but any kind of foreigners. The Ottoman Empire was an amazing cosmopolitan place, full of Turks, Greeks, Armenians, Jews. But within a space of few years, they are massacring huge numbers of ethnic minorities. And it becomes, they're just sort of driven out or killed. And then there's the United States. The United States, that's a very good article if you haven't read it, on populism. The US has an extremely long tradition of populism. And towards the end of this first wave of globalization, you begin to see strong populist movements, taking two types. These they put up there. And populism that's really complaining about the elite and the money they make. Attacks on money, power, and William Jennings Bryan. And a second type of populism which complains about the elite and complains about people of colour. And that's really very successful. The Working Man's Party of California campaigns and drives, and eventually there's this exclusion of Chinese, the Chinese Exclusion Act. More sinister is the rebirth of the Ku Klux Klan, which was last seen in the US South after the Civil War. It's reborn in World War I, and it's 5 million active members, and that really forces is a major influence in pushing Congress to adopt immigration laws that exclude, more or less exclude, anybody who's not white, more or less exclude anybody who's not from the north and west of the country, of Europe. It's a long, long tradition, and American populism comes out towards the end of a globalization period. And the policies it introduces last a long time, right? So Asians couldn't emigrate to the United States until reform in 1965. That's like 60 years. As the world gets more closely connected, we see a pattern that people really dislike large political units. So whole countries break up. Russia, which was a vast country, broke up into multiple units. Austria-Hungary breaks up into Austria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, whatever. Ottoman Empire breaks up into a lot of countries. Britain breaks up into Britain and Ireland. At the bottom of all of that, I think, is this pattern of winners and losers in the 19th century. Asia was a huge loser. Half the world's GDP in 1820, 15% in 1914. All the people, the handicraft workers of Asia are at the center of world manufacturing, lose their jobs. Because the winners in manufacturing countries, they're no longer competitive. Latin America we think of it as always unequal. Actually, it wasn't unequal until the 19th century. In the 19th century, inequality shoots up. So you can see a series of people who benefit from globalization, a series of people who don't. Men benefited. White people benefited. Other people don't. You can go through these winners and losers. It's not, unfortunately, the benefits are not evenly spread. That's from Piketty, of course, just to remind you that the share of the 1% is in the United States in 1928, just before deglobalization occurs. Era of deglobalization becomes more equal, and now we're back just at the point where deglobalization occurred. So what was the role of business in all this? Well, it wasn't particularly heroic, I think. It creates all this wealth, but it does nothing useful really to distribute the wealth. Western business is a huge beneficiary of Western imperialism. Business leaders are a huge beneficiary of income inequality. And business goes on to be a huge beneficiary of deglobalization. As I put there, hundreds of US companies were very prominent in Nazi Germany. Only one company divests. But not entirely. As you get these globalization waves, a lot of money is made, and a handful of people think they have a responsibility to give away that money. It's where the Carnegie Foundation, the first philanthropic foundation, is created. Carnegie articulates a view that a millionaire is just a trustee for the poor. And then HBS is very, very interesting too, because HBS deans take a lead in saying things are going like really badly, and what should business do about it? And there's Dean Donham. He's writing in 27. He's warning that our civilization is heading towards one of its periods of decline. Like 6 years later, Hitler comes to power. 4 years later, the Japanese will attack China. So it actually was heading for decline. He got it exactly right. And he also gets it exactly right about the income inequality of the United States is going to cause like a mega problem unless somebody wants to deal with it. But you can see what he's saying. Business leaders need to harmonize their selfish instincts with a strong emphasis on social responsibility. So we think now like of stakeholder capitalism as something like European or something. Actually, it's HBS people who were going on and on about it. And what they're doing is not because of, I'm sure he's a very nice guy, but not because of their goodness of their heart. But what he's really worried about is the business system will lose legitimacy and people will take it out. That's what he's up to. Oh, there's my book. Unfortunately, this isn't a book promotion story because it's not published for like 4 more months, so you've long forgotten about this. And I just put it up there because I've been looking at a set of people who are also trying to build businesses to improve the world. And the only conclusion of that book is it's actually very hard to do that. Very hard. So what could history tell us before I stop talking? If anybody tells to me that the world can't deglobalize because we've got like Facebook or Google, I so don't believe that. It's so not true historically. If you look at that great reversal, the world had never been so connected. People could fly around, they could travel around, they could talk to each other, the cinema, they could look at each other. And what do? They close the whole damn thing down. They say no migration, no capital movement, no foreign investment, bye-bye business. So there's no historical evidence that technological interconnectedness can prevent globalization. The trouble about globalization is both waves, is all these winners and losers. And the second trouble about globalization is because it's associated with improvements in communications technology, people can actually see the winners and losers. And they really don't like that. And towards the end of a globalization, this seems to reach a stage of a high degree of fragility. And in a high degree of fragility, a shock of some kind is likely to tip over and change the rules of the game. I personally think we are probably, we're not in a bump in the road, we're in a major paradigm shift. I could be completely wrong, historians shouldn't predict the future, but there are major parallels with what happened in the past, and the numbers are looking like that too. We've seen the same winners and losers. They're a little bit different winners and losers. The first wave of globalization, the countryside also lost in many, many respects. This time it's lost big time. Now it's not the Asian handicraft workers, right? It's the blue-collar workers in Europe and the United States who've turned out to be big-time losers. And they've been big-time losers partly because of automation and robots and everything else. They've been big-time losers too because business has moved elsewhere. There's a difference in how this has happened. I think in the first global economy, it happened through, so I put so-called market forces, but it's lots of things going on, players and things, plus the Western imposed regime of imperialism, which prevents any sort of protection for those workers. The displacement of blue-collar workers here is not accidental. I mean, people in boardrooms in the United States and Europe have executed that strategy. They've systematically moved jobs outside the United States and Europe as a matter of policy, not as a matter of policy because of the way I think the system had been structured with the growth of shareholder capitalism from the 1980s, which, as you can see from that quote by the Dean, was not something that's always been around. This is something that takes hold in the 1970s and the 1980s. Dean Donham would have had absolute fit about businesses pursuing a shareholder value strategy. So the problem with that system is it had very, very, very weak incentives to think about the consequences of decisions to outsource or introduce robots or think about self-drive cars. Very weak incentives to think about those consequences of those, and maximum incentives, including high degrees of compensation, to think about doing things in other ways. And so we have a situation, right, like Apple with 90% of its phones made whatever in China. The makers of those phones receive high degrees of subsidy from provincial Chinese governments, high degrees of subsidy, billions of dollars of subsidy. It doesn't cross Apple's mind to think about the consequences of that because the system is structured in such a way that you can't really, and the CEO loses his job if he attempts to do that. It's one of my favourite maps about how wealth is shifting away. And that's my favourite McKinsey map about how wealth is shifting eastwards over time. But a lot of that is not happening by accident. It's happening through orchestration. It's happening through orchestration. And of course, there's its consequences. We haven't seen that. I mean, who votes for Clinton and who votes for Trump? It's the prosperous part of the United States, the center of economic decision-making, business decision-making are blue, and hardly any of the red areas are these beneficiaries of the new wealth. What to do about that? Well, I have just put a few meandering thoughts up there. There are a ton of parallels with what's going on, and that's why I'm concerned about it. It's because I've kind of seen it all before. Well, I'm not that old, but I've read about it before, right? Can history help us in some ways? It tells us what not to do. So the Great Depression, financial crisis, did absolutely not cause deglobalization or anything. Absolutely didn't. It's the policy response to that. So in the 1930, the US led the world into protectionism by imposing very large tariffs, which destroyed world trade for a decade. So that would be a very bad idea. What springs up with all this mayhem going on is a range of nationalistic and populistic regimes. They begin by leaving international institutions like the League of Nations, which was the precursor to the United Nations. So Japan leaves, Germany leaves, Italy leaves. So international institutions disintegrate, but that turns out just to get them on a roll, and some of them become very, very assertive and aggressive with the results we know. So we know not what to do. So I think an interesting question is what business leaders should be doing in this new age. And I think revisiting some of the thoughts of Dean Donlan wouldn't be a bad start. But I think what business needs to do is think about ways of creating a great many more winners than it's been doing in the past. I think inevitably that means reimagining what shareholder value means and what fiduciary duty means, because it's going, we can see where it's ending up. And I think business leaders need to lead by example, which they absolutely have failed to do in the last wave of globalization, very sadly. Not all of them, but a disproportionate amount. And I think HBS has to think very hard about itself, whether it can be more part of the solution than it was in the last era of globalization. I'll stop now. So I hope that's put you all in a good, cheerful mood. We've got a party tonight. So I'll take questions. I'll be denounced. I'll be attacked. My old friend.
Very young friend.
Sorry, is that just the beard though?
No, so I'm curious just in looking back to the parallels from the deglobalization and specifically the reglobalization through the second and third modules or both.
No, nobody knows about the modules, right?
Okay, well, when the graph goes back up, like in that parallel of reglobalization, what parts did the public and private sector take in refranchising some of the disenfranchised groups, whether it's Asian handicraft workers or like blue collar workers? Like, where did the public and private sectors come in opening those groups back up to a globalized economy, not just with tariffs and high level decision makers, treating immigration legislation differently, but in those kind of larger groups?
The governments, public. I think governments or public agencies take a lead in that. So a lot of defranchisement happened through inability to access education or that sort of thing, and governments in this deglobalized period intervened massively to try and make things more equal, investing in education, investing in other things. I think governments really are key to that. Some businesses within those countries too, behind all these barriers, also are sort of doing some things as well. Yeah.
do you see any parallels in the way the media has acted sort of in that period of deglobalization in the 30s to today?
I mean, what you get in the 1930s is what you get in the 1930s in populist countries, right, is the difference between fact and fiction disappears. So, yeah, Hitler's Germany, propaganda minister Goebbels had studied PR in the United States, and they produced the most amazing like movies and news and this sort of thing, and really truth and reality is like totally blurred. And that was a fun, I mean, that's one way they were able to do so many things in Nazi Germany, because people are unaware, or they have a very distinct view of what's happening on. You can do the same, I think, in Japan in the 1930s as well. So that kind of situation where like truth and reality are blurred is extremely dangerous. It's an extremely dangerous situation. Of course, we've seen that all over the place now, right? I mean, Turkey, for example, there's been a complete elimination, right, of the free press. It's a very, very, very distorted picture of the world. China has been carefully distorting for a very, very long time, and they're doing it very successfully. Thailand, which I know very well, the media has lost all sorts of. So truth and reality, and once you have truth and reality distorted, it's an exceptionally difficult situation, an exceptionally dangerous situation, I think. So, that's why, when we see all this stuff about like, Facebook and these bubbles and all that sort of thing, I think, I see lots of red flags, because when you get that kind of situation, it's like dangerous, and so, can't somebody pick somebody for me?